I gripped the old, tattered rag, its fibers reeking of the sharp, stinging scent of chlorine, while deep in the pocket of my faded cleaner's uniform, a tiny golden key weighed heavy against my thigh. That key didn't unlock a supply closet or a janitor's locker. It belonged to a private vault in the most prestigious bank in the country. A vault holding documents that could bring this five-star hotel and every arrogant guest within its walls to their knees. For 3 years, I had wiped dust from mirrors that only reflected an exhausted girl with tangled hair and red, raw hands. But the truth was hidden beneath the grime. My name is Elina Warner, the sole heiress to the Warner Group empire. My father, the wealthiest man in the nation, had set one condition. I had to live 3 years on my own, without a single cent from his accounts, to learn the true price of labor and how to distinguish a genuine heart from a predator's grin. I had survived. Today, the clock was finally running out. Today was also my 3rd anniversary with Mark. Mark was my world, my only breath of fresh air in a life suffocating under the weight of poverty. We had met in a dingy cafe when I didn't have enough change for a sandwich, and he had paid for it with a shy, charming smile. He was an ambitious architect, struggling to break through the walls of corruption and nepotism. I remembered every night spent in our drafty apartment, sharing a single bowl of noodle sand, dreaming of a future where we didn't have to count pennies. I was certain he loved me for my soul, for the way I laughed at his clumsy jokes, not for the billions I secretly held. Or so I believed. I had prepared a special gift for him, a table at the finest restaurant in the very hotel where I scrubbed floors. Inside a plain envelope sat a bank statement and the deed to a sprawling estate. I wanted to look into his eyes and say, "My love, our struggle is over. Now, I will give you the world." All morning, I felt like I was floating, ignoring the sneers of the guests and the crushing weight of the water buckets. I imagined his face when he realized the girl who came home, every night with blistered hands, could actually buy him any architectural firm in the city. I could already see our wedding dance, a life where we never had to worry about the cost of groceries again. My father had already blessed my choice. He had seen how Mark supported me through my hardest days and was ready to welcome him as a son. But fate is a cruel playwright, fond of shattering crystal castles at the exact moment they begin to shine. I was finishing up in the penthouse suite on the top floor when the door swung open. I instinctively lowered my gaze, as the hotel's rigid etiquette demanded, waiting for the guests to pass. But then, a familiar scent hit me, the same cologne I had saved for 3 months to buy him for his birthday. My heart stopped. I looked up and saw Mark. He wasn't alone. His arm was wrapped possessively around the waist of a woman in a dress that cost more than my annual salary. It was Camilla, the daughter of a massive construction mogul, a woman infamous for her arrogance and vanity. Mark was looking at her with a kind of adoration I hadn't seen in his eyes for a long, long time. The world around me began to dissolve into a cold, suffocating fog of realization. My sudden movement sent the bucket of dirty water toppling over, and a murky puddle began to spread slowly across the expensive Persian rug. Mark flinched, finally noticing me. For a split second, a flash of fear crossed his eyes, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a wall of icy indifference and annoyance. He didn't even pull his hand away from Camilla's waist. Instead, he drew her closer, as if showing off his latest trophy. "Elina? What are you doing here?" His voice, which used to whisper words of love to me, now sounded like he was speaking to a bothersome insect. "I told you I had important business meetings today. You shouldn't have come? Important meetings?" My voice shook, and I could feel hot tears stinging my eyes. "Mark, today is our 3rd anniversary. 3 years together. I prepared a surprise." Camilla suddenly burst into laughter, covering her manicured mouth with a hand adorned with a massive diamond. "Oh, Mark, is this the little cleaning girl you told me about? God, she smells like bleach from a mile away. Did she honestly think you'd spend the evening with her instead of celebrating your new contract?" Mark looked at me with disgust, adjusting his lapel. "Look, Elina, don't make a scene. It's over. You're a smart girl. You should have seen this coming. We're from different worlds. You're a maid who scrubs toilets for the rich, and I'm an architect who will now be building skyscrapers for them. Mr. Adrian Blackwood, the second wealthiest man in this country, just signed an exclusive contract with me. This is my ticket to a life you can't even dream of. But I'm rich too, Mark, I cried out, pulling the envelope from my pocket. You don't understand. I'm Elina Warner. My father is the owner of the Warner Group. I only worked here as an experiment to find true love. Look at these documents, Mark. There are billions here. My family owns this entire hotel. I reached out with the papers, but Camilla snatched them first. She glanced at the bank seal for a second, and without even reading, crumpled them into a ball and threw them directly into the puddle of filthy water on the floor. Elina Warner? Camilla went into another fit of laughter. Girl, have the cleaning chemicals rotted your brain? You could have picked a simpler name than the wealthiest dynasty in the world. Look at your hands. They're covered in calluses and cracks. Look at your cheap shoes. You're nobody. Just a loser with a wild imagination. Mark took a step toward me, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. You know what's the funniest part? Even if you were a king's daughter, I'd still choose Camilla. She gives me connections now, not in your fairy tales. Who would ever want to marry a nobody like you? Look in the mirror. You're a hollow space. Clean this mess up and get out of my life. Mark's words hit harder than physical pain. I felt my heart, which I had so carefully guarded for him, shatter into 1,000 jagged shards. I stood in the middle of that luxury suite, humiliated, crushed by the one person I would have given everything for. I would. A deep, calm, and incredibly commanding voice echoed from the doorway. We all turned at once. Standing there was a man whose presence immediately filled the room. He wore a flawless navy blue suit, and his gaze was so sharp it felt like he was reading our very souls. He wasn't just attractive. He radiated a quiet confidence that money alone couldn't buy. He walked slowly toward me, ignoring the stunned Mark and Camilla, and stood by my side, lightly touching my shoulder. I would marry this girl, he repeated, looking Mark straight in the eye, and I would consider it the greatest honor of my life. Mark was the first to recover from the shock, letting out a mocking snort. Oh, another crazy person? Have you seen her, buddy? She scrubs floors. You must be just as much of a loser as she is if you're eyeing this trash. Do you even know who I am? I work for Adrian Blackwood. One phone call and I'll have you kicked out of this city. The stranger only gave a faint, chilling smile at the corners of his mouth, a smile filled with such hidden menace that it took my breath away. He didn't know who I was, and I didn't know who he was, but in that moment, he became my only lifeline in this sea of despair. The stranger's hand on my shoulder felt like an anchor in a storm. He didn't look at Mark with anger. He looked at him with the kind of pity one reserves for a terminal patient who doesn't know they're dying. Mark, fueled by the adrenaline of his new status and Camilla's shrill encouragement, didn't back down. He stepped closer, the smell of expensive cognac on his breath, and pointed a trembling finger at the man standing beside me. You want her? Take her, Mark spat, his voice cracking with a mixture of malice and laughter. Two nobodies in a city that eats people like you for breakfast. You're doing me a favor, honestly. I was wondering how to get rid of the dead weight without looking like the bad guy. Enjoy the scent of bleach and broken dreams, pal. The stranger, who later told me his name was Julian, didn't blink. He looked down at me, his eyes softening into a deep, oceanic blue that seemed to promise a safety I hadn't felt in years. Are you ready to leave this place? He asked quietly. I looked at the crumpled, wet ball of paper in the puddle, the proof of my billion-dollar inheritance. Now looking like literal trash, and then at Mark's smug, triumphant face. A cold, hard knot tied itself in my chest. I didn't want the money to be the reason I was saved. I wanted to be seen. Yes, I whispered, my voice regaining its strength. I'm ready. Within an hour, we were standing in a sterile, fluorescent-lit municipal office. It was the most unromantic setting imaginable. Yet, as we signed the marriage license, my hand didn't shake. I felt like I was jumping off a cliff, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the fall. Julian told me he was a consultant who moved around a lot, a man of simple means who valued sincerity over status. I lied to him too. I told him I was just Elina, the girl with no family and even less money. I wanted to know, just for a little while longer, if someone could love the girl who cleaned floors. He took me to a modest apartment on the edge of the city. It was clean, sparsely furnished, but filled with books that suggested a mind far more complex than a simple consultant. But the peace was short-lived. That night, as I lay awake on the small sofa, my phone vibrated. It was a text from Mark. He had sent a photo of a luxury watch, the caption reading, "First bonus from Blackwood. This cost more than your new husband makes in a year. Hope the cheap champagne was worth it, Elle." The next morning, the emotional roller coaster took a terrifying dip. I tried to call my father's private line to tell him the news, that I had found someone, that I was married, but for the first time in 3 years, the line was dead. Panic surged through me. I called my father's lead attorney, a man who had known me since I was a child. "Elina," he said, his voice heavy with a gravity that made my blood run cold. "Your father, there's been a complication. His rivals have moved against the Warner Group. They've frozen the primary trust accounts pending an audit. Until we can prove the legitimacy of your trial period and your current social standing, we can't release a cent. And Elina, there's a rumor that the Blackwood family is the one leading the hostile takeover. They want to bury the Warners forever." My heart hammered against my ribs. I looked at Julian, who was calmly making coffee in a chipped mug, looking like the picture of domestic simplicity. I was a billionaire on paper, but in reality, I was now more penniless than ever. If the Blackwoods succeeded, my inheritance would be nothing but a mountain of debt and a target on my back. And then the final blow of the day landed. Julian set his coffee down and checked his watch. "I have to go, Elina. I have a meeting with a new lead architect for a project I'm supervising. A man named Mark, apparently. He thinks he's the next big thing." My breath hitched. Julian was going to meet Mark. He was going into the lion's den of the very man who had destroyed me. And I was terrified that if Mark found out who Julian really was, a nobody, married to a cleaner, he would use his new power to crush my husband just to get back at me. I realized then that I hadn't just married a stranger to spite my ex. I had dragged an innocent man into a war between the two most powerful families in the country. "Julian, wait," I called out, my voice desperate. He turned at the door, his hand on the knob. "Don't worry," he said, and for a split second, that same chilling, predatory smile I saw in the hotel suite flashed across his face. I'm very good at handling people who overestimate themselves. I watched him leave, my mind racing. I was trapped between two lies, my own secret wealth that was now frozen, and my husband's mysterious consulting job. I had to get to the Warner Group headquarters, but as I stepped outside, a black SUV pulled up, and 2 men in suits blocked my path. "Miss Warner, you need to come with us. Your father didn't tell you everything about the trial. There's a reason he wanted you to marry a commoner, and it's not what you think." The black SUV didn't take me to a dungeon. It screeched to a halt in front of the Warner Tower, the glass skyscraper that bore my family name. The men didn't speak a word as they hustled me through a private service elevator and shoved me into the grand boardroom on the 60th floor. My heart was a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Through the double mahogany doors, I heard a voice that made my skin crawl. "Mark, it's a simple signature really," Mark was saying, his voice oozing a newfound, sickening confidence. "As the lead architect for the Blackwood expansion, I verified the structural weaknesses in the Warner properties. They're ripe for a hostile takeover. We strip the assets, we dissolve the legacy, and the Blackwoods reign supreme. It's business, isn't it?" I burst into the room, my uniform stained, my hair a mess, looking every bit the nobody Mark had labeled me. The room fell silent. Mark stood there, pen in hand, flanked by Camilla and a group of stone-faced executives. Across from them sat my father's empty chair, and beside it my father's lead attorney, looking defeated. "Elina, how did you get past security?" Mark sneered, throwing the pen onto the table. "Look at you. You're like a persistent stain that just won't wash out. Are you here to beg for your job back? Or maybe you want a front row seat to watch me erase your father's name from the skyline?" "You won't sign that, Mark," I said, my voice cold and sharp as a razor. "You're a fraud. You're using stolen data, and I won't let you destroy what my father built." Camilla stepped forward, her heels clicking like a countdown to an explosion. "Oh, honey, the cleaner thinks she has a vote. Your father is incapacitated. Your accounts are frozen. And your husband, the pathetic little consultant, is probably at some bus stop right now, wondering where you are. You have nothing. Actually, a voice boomed from the doorway. She has everything. We all turned. Julian walked in, but he wasn't the man in the chipped mug apartment anymore. He wore a suit that cost more than my father's entire car collection. The air in the room changed instantly. The executives who had been ignoring me suddenly stood up, their faces pale with a mixture of awe and terror. Mark laughed, a high, nervous sound. You? What are you doing here? This is a high-level acquisition meeting, not a support group for the unemployed. Julian walked straight to the head of the table, the seat reserved for the most powerful person in the room, and pulled it out. But he didn't sit. He looked at the Blackwood representatives, then at Mark. "My name's Adrian Blackwood," Julian said, his voice a low, terrifying rumble. The silence that followed was so heavy it felt like the floor might collapse. Mark's face turned a translucent shade of gray. The pen he had been holding rolled off the table and clicked onto the floor. No," Mark stammered, his eyes darting between Julian and me. "That's impossible. Adrian Blackwood is a recluse. No one has seen him in years. You're a consultant? You live in a dump on the outskirts?" "I am a man who grew tired of people like you, Mark," Adrian said, leaning over the table. "People who value a contract over a soul. I lived in that dump because I wanted to see if there was anyone left in the city who didn't care about my bank balance. And I found her." He reached out and took my hand, pulling me to his side. "I didn't know she was a Warner. I thought she was a girl who cleaned floors and had a heart of gold. And she didn't know I owned the very company you were trying to use to destroy her." He looked at the contract Mark was so eager to sign and tore it in half with one swift, violent motion. "The merger is off," Julian declared. "And as for the lead architect," he looked at Mark, who looked as though he was about to faint. "You're not just fired, Mark. I'm going to make sure that the only thing you ever build for the rest of your life is a house of cards and a prison. Sell for the corporate espionage you just admitted to." Camilla tried to speak, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, but Julian cut her off with a single look. "Get out, all of you, before I decide to buy your father's company just to fire you personally." They scrambled. Mark tried to reach out to me, his voice a pathetic whimper. "Elina, baby, I didn't know. I was doing it for us. I didn't even let him finish." I looked him in the eye, the man I had loved for 3 years, the man I would have given my life for, and I felt nothing but a cold, liberating emptiness. "You were right about one thing, Mark," I said softly. "We really are from different worlds. Mine has a soul. Yours is just empty." Security dragged them out, their screams of protest echoing down the hallway. The boardroom was suddenly quiet, leaving just me and the man I had married only hours ago. The nobody I thought I was protecting, and the billionaire he didn't know I was. He turned to me, his expression unreadable. "So," he said, his voice losing its edge of steel, "you're Elina Warner, and you're Adrian Blackwood," I countered, my heart pounding for an entirely different reason now. We stood there, two of the most powerful people in the country, realizing that our entire marriage was built on a foundation of beautiful, desperate lies. The dust hadn't even settled yet, and the real question was hanging in the air. Was what we felt in that tiny apartment real, or was it just another part of the masquerade? The silence in the boardroom was heavier than the confrontation that had just occurred. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city lights began to flicker on, indifferent to the fact that the two most powerful empires in the country had just collided and fused in a single moment. I looked at Adrian O. I looked at Julian, the man who had shared a chipped mug of coffee with me this morning, and felt a strange sense of mourning. The simple life we had glimpsed for 24 hours was gone, incinerated by the reality of our names. "You knew," I whispered, my voice echoing in the vast space, "when you walked into that hotel room. When you said, 'I do.' Did you know who I was?" Adrian stepped toward me, his expensive shoes clicking on the marble where my father's rivals had just stood. He reached out, his fingers brushing a stray lock of hair from my face, the same gentle gesture he'd used in his cramped apartment. "I didn't," he said, and for the first time I saw a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes. "I went to that hotel to anonymously scout the staff's working conditions. I saw a man breaking a woman's heart in the cruelest way possible. I didn't see an heiress, Elina. I saw a girl whose soul was too big for the room she was standing in. I married the girl in the uniform because I wanted to save her. I had no idea she was the only person in the world who didn't need saving. Suddenly, the large monitors on the boardroom wall hissed to life. The incapacitated face of my father, Thomas Warner, appeared on the screen. He wasn't in a hospital bed. He was sitting in his study, a glass of vintage scotch in his hand and a knowing, tired smile on his face. "Congratulations, Elina," he said, his voice booming through the speakers. "And you too, Adrian." I suppose the trial worked better than I intended? I stared at the screen, my blood turning to ice. "Father, you were behind this? The frozen accounts? The hostile takeover?" "I had to know, Elina," he sighed. "I had to know if you would stay true to yourself when the world stripped everything away, and I knew Adrian was looking for the same thing. His father and I. We didn't arrange a marriage. We arranged a possibility. I leaked your location to him months ago, hoping your paths would cross. The rest, the betrayal by that pathetic architect. The timing of the merger was the world showing you who people really are when they think no one is watching. The realization hit me like a physical blow. My 3 years of struggle, my heartache, my desperate marriage to a stranger was all a masterfully choreographed play." I looked at Adrian, expecting him to be angry, but he was merely looking at the screen with a grim expression of respect. "Your father played a dangerous game, Elina," Adrian said quietly. "But he was right about one thing. I would have never found you in a ballroom. I had to find you in the dirt. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Mark didn't just lose his job, he became a pariah. The Blackwood contract he had bragged about became his death warrant. Adrian ensured that every legal firm in the country knew about Mark's attempt to sell proprietary Warner data. Within a week, Mark was evicted from his luxury apartment, his fiancé Camilla having dumped him the moment she realized he was a liability. The last I heard, he was working as a night shift janitor in a shopping mall, a poetic irony that I took no pleasure in, but felt was just. But for us, the transition was harder. We moved into the Warner estate, but it felt cold. The gold-plated faucets and silk sheets couldn't compare to the warmth of that small, dusty apartment where we first hid from the world. One evening, a month after the boardroom massacre, I found Adrian in the library. He was holding the wedding license we had signed at the municipal office, the only thing we owned that wasn't tied to a corporate merger. "I have a surprise for you," he said. He took me for a drive, far away from the skyscrapers and the prying eyes of the press. We stopped in front of a small, dilapidated building on the outskirts of the city. It was the same apartment block where we had spent our first night. "I bought the whole building," he said, handing me a key. "I'm turning it into a foundation for people who are starting over. No names, no titles, just a place for people to be seen for who they are, not what they have." And he paused, opening the door to our old unit. Inside, nothing had changed. The chipped mugs were still on the counter. The worn-out sofa was still there. "I want to spend half the week here," Adrian whispered, pulling me into his arms. "I don't want to be Adrian Blackwood all the time. I want to be the man who married a girl with bleach on her hands and stars in her eyes. I want to remember how it felt when we had nothing but each other." I buried my head in his chest, the scent of his cologne mixing with the familiar smell of the old apartment. I had started this journey as a girl trying to prove her worth to a billionaire father, and I had ended it as a woman who realized that the greatest wealth isn't found in a bank vault, but in the eyes of someone who sees you when you are invisible. Mark had asked who would ever want to marry a nobody like me. As I looked at Julian, I realized the answer. Only someone who was tired of being a somebody. We didn't just merge 2 companies that day. We saved 2 people who were drowning in gold. And as we sat on that old, lumpy sofa, sharing a drink from a chipped mug, I knew that the cleaner and the consultant had finally found their way home.